We're diving into a heated debate sparked by the recent Senate vote that blocked a bill aiming to secure nationwide access to in vitro fertilization, or IVF. Cindy has the story. Cindy?
Yeah, a CNN article by Claire Foran and Ted Barrett, published on June 13th, tells us about the result of a Senate vote on a text that would protect IVF in the US, regardless of the whims of state legislatures. The GOP, surprisingly, decided to vote against this text, and we'll talk about why.
The irony of it all. So, Cindy, since you have actually introduced us to this story, what are your thoughts about the story when you first read it?
So, there's something I don't say very often, but the GOP is right here. This is definitely political theater. It's Schumer who is trying to force the GOP to vote on certain laws so he can use their rejection in the Democratic campaign. And that's the purpose of those laws he proposed recently, like the bump stock law he tried to advance. There were a few in the last couple of weeks. And to me, it's obvious that this is the case. He's trying to make the GOP vote on those issues, and then all the senators and both people in the chambers that are going to be on the ballot in November, they will be able to use, hey, look, my opponent voted against this and this and this and this, vote for me. And I think it's a very, very effective tactic. And I think it's a win-win situation, because when these votes are offered, the GOP can choose to do the right thing and vote for them, or they choose to not do it, and it can be used against them later. So I think it's political theater, yes, but it's savvy, I think.
Well, what about you, Jimmy? Do you think it's just political theater? Do you agree with Cindy, or do you think that it was an actual pertinent thing to bring up to really rule on the fate of IVF?
Well, I think it's both. It's an attempt to get Republicans to have a conversation, a tough conversation, force them into a corner and make them address something that is not necessarily a right, but something that we have the ability to offer people. And if we're going to operate on any standards of consistency, it should be offered to them based on the fact that we offer, medical insurance will cover things like hair replacement or erection pills, right? Things that really do help the men, the old white men that have the majority in both chambers of the legislature, right? And so if we're going to be consistent, then if we can't have one, why should we have any of it? If we can't provide people something that will bring them joy and allow them to be parents, why should and counter something that their body is doing naturally? Well, then we should take away everything, right? It's only fair. And I don't think that many lawmakers are going to vote to have Viagra taken away or have Bosley not covered by their medical insurance. In fact, these things are covered by I'm venturing to say that there's probably coverage from the government medical plan, because they get everything. I mean, these guys serve 2 years and get a retirement. Anyway, I'm digressing a little bit. What I want to say on my last point is that, I know 3 families that could not conceive. They had in vitro fertilization, and then they conceived naturally following that. Sometimes you just need a little help. And why, as a society with the means and the desire to help, why can't we just do that?
Yeah, I agree with that part, because there are a lot of families that are trying to conceive, but they just don't have the wherewithal to do it naturally, right? So having an option like IVF to be available to do that would make sense. And I guess I am a bit confused by members of the GOP who would have issues concerning IVF, especially when this is the party that's supposed to be quote unquote pro-life. So why would we even consider like what happened in Alabama, which we covered, where the majority GOP-led Alabama Senate, the Supreme Court there tried to block IVF, and it's also said they're frozen embryos or persons. So it's very weird to me how all this thing is really playing out. And, and speaking of, since we did cover about the Alabama Supreme Court's ruling on frozen embryos and also the Southern Baptist delegates' concerns, Cindy, how do you see the ethical and moral debates around IVF influencing future legislation?
Well, it's even more weird than what you were saying, because for the party who is trying to imply that there is this great replacement, that white people need to make more babies, being against this is just nonsensical. But yeah, I think the idea to talk about this more is interesting, because a lot of people, especially in the right, they tend to reduce abortion to abortion, when in fact it's reproductive rights, and
Right.
showing that there is a real push from the GOP to prevent any access to IVF. It helps broadening the topic and showing that, no, it's not just abortion, it's everything that deals with reproductive rights. And that entails people, things that people care about, like what you said, the morning pill, the contraception, everything. And so, yeah, I think it's good to talk about this. It's good to for the Senate to force GOP to vote against in some way, and for the record. And I think it's interesting.
Well, how do you, Jimmy, actually view the argument that the Democratic-led legislation saying it's unnecessary overreach and a political show vote? What might be the motivations behind such legislation from both parties and their perspectives?
Well, I think on the Democratic side, if I were to argue that it is not, in fact, political theater, I would be saying, nope, this is the perfect time to have this conversation, because we have a very important election coming up and people need to know where you stand. Now, if you are, in fact, the party of family values, then why are you supportive of legislation that would take away the construction, the foundation of a family, which, of course, is reproduction? So that would be, I think, one hill that I'd be willing to die on, and just kind of tell them, look, you are not the family values party, because you definitely do not value the family. In fact, we have the means to give these people who want to have a family the ability to do so, but instead, where is our money going? And that is the segue that I would make, and show that, well, as the family values party, while you reject the ability for people to form a family, you are also willing to spend more money on military aid, or on, well, let's say religious legislation that clearly supports religion and is in violation of the Constitution. I mean, these are the things that I would bring up, and just kind of highlight, look, our money is being misallocated, and if it's going to be a financial argument from the right that says, well, we shouldn't have to spend our tax dollars on that. Well, okay, let's talk about what we're actually spending our tax dollars on. And that would be my second argument there.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's go back to that whole thing about, what is our money being spent on, and even like what other means? Because like I know that Cindy, I believe that you brought up or Jimmy, it was one of you. Sorry guys, I'm an old person, but one of you actually brought up the thing about having, no, Jimmy, it was you, the coverage available for some of these different treatments, especially when you brought up like, Cialis, Viagra, minoxidil for like your hair loss and things of that nature. So, there is an issue that requirements for like employee sponsored insurance and also public insurance plans covering, actual fertility treatments, including IVF. So how do you think if, like, say, for instance, so we know this particular bill is blocked. There may be something that's going to come out that says that we're just going to ban this altogether, or maybe other things in the future. How do you think that's actually going to impact employee base or, public insurance plans that cover these things? Cindy, I want to start with you, and then Jimmy, I would like for you to follow up with that.
Yeah, I think it will increase this trend that we've seen since Roe versus Wade was overturned, to see that some states are going to be medical deserts, as we call them in my country, because doctors will not want to go there, and people will not want to go there either, and military base won't be new ones won't be installed there, and companies will think twice before setting up buildings there, and it's going to have very, very strong long-term bad effects on the population at large. And as usually, the poorest people will suffer the most from this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Kenny,
and
what are your thoughts?
I think it'll drive costs for insurance up if we start to see this desertion that Cindy is talking about. And I also think that there is a relationship here. There are probably insurance companies that don't want to cover this kind of thing, and they're lobbying for these representatives to vote against such access. So I don't think this is merely just a conservative point of view problem, but I do think that this is a lobbying problem as well, where there are people who want to control the kind of medical care that they would be responsible for. And in that way, they can control the costs because they don't want to lose money by covering more and not being able to raise their rates, which they would essentially get to do anyway. But it's not going to make anything easier. I think it's a great point. The poorest people are going to suffer the most. And it's just it's hypocritical. I think I can't highlight enough the fact that the government and Congress's medical plan is one of the most comprehensive plans known to anybody in this country. I mean, they get everything they want. But to take that away from people who need medical coverage is incredibly hypocritical. Who do these people work for, right? We do not work for them. They should be doing what's best for the country. That is the social contract that they are obliged to. And they are not, and that conversation needs to be had.
That is an excellent point to bring up, especially when you're talking about who is behind this. Is it just the political base that we're talking about, the GOP versus like the dirty libs? Or are we also talking about corporate interests, which, let's face it, insurance companies have a huge actual liability when it comes to what type of laws are passed when it comes to healthcare, right? IVF being one of them, what type of prescriptions are going to be covered versus not, the cost point, et cetera, et cetera. And I know that the conversation in those insurance companies' corporate offices are always about keeping cost down. And often what that means is that people who happen to buy into these plans, most likely through their employers, are going to have less things that they're going to be able to have covered because their insurance company wants to keep costs down. So even if they are a family that wants to have IVF because they're not able to conceive, the natural way, then there is a very big possibility that all the cost will be coming out of their pocket, or that particular procedure may not even be available at all. And Cindy, I want to ask you, since we're bringing up this whole point about what is available as far as health coverage is concerned, how are the potential impacts going to be for people who may be seeking these particular procedures, depending on what state that they're in? Like we have seen where, let's just say Texas has what you mentioned, a medical desert, because of their very stringent laws on abortion rights, right? So if we have this particular bill that's saying it's blocked, and that the control of what's available for IVF is going to be thrown back into the states, like Roe versus Wade was, how is that going to impact other families that may be in those states? Please start, Cindy, and then Jimmy, I would like for you to chime in.
Well, first, the law that was proposed by Schumer, it also included how the finances of this were supposed to work. And so insurance were supposed to cover some of the costs. And so it's a very real possibility that the lobbies of those companies, they worked hard against this. That's a real possibility. But I think it's just, I'm not sure it's going to matter much in the great large plan, because there are so many things that are kicking down at people in those red states that I'm not sure this will make a huge difference. Because we talked about religion imposed in schools, we talked about pollution, we talked about voter suppression, gerrymandering, these medical issues, abortion. I mean, to me, who is not living in the US, sometimes I just can't comprehend the depth of the problem in this country.
Yeah.
And how much, because I keep hearing in the news people saying the US is the greatest country on earth. What's wrong with you? I mean, how can you be blind to this point? I mean, it's unbelievable. So yeah, I know that individually some people will be devastated because they can have children. Mm-hmm. I know because I went through this. So I know it will be impactful for some people, but
right.
on the large scheme of things, I don't think this specific problem will matter much. I mean, it doesn't impact that many people in not like abortion or contraception or this.
But it still could be something that can be impactful, and even though there are still families that are going to be seeking this procedure. And as far as like what you said, we don't know what's wrong with us. We're still trying to figure that out, Cindy. But what are your thoughts, Jimmy, about that question that I just posed about the impact that it could possibly have for other states that already have like such stringent laws when it comes to reproductive rights in the first place?
Well, any progress that would take place in this area, of course, is going to be stymied. And I think it's ironic that the people who support the Republican Party, generally speaking, are very poor, and they're only shooting themselves in the foot if they plan on taking advantage of medical care that could be offered to them by voting for people who want to shut it down or want to not even have the conversation, right? So the argument to not voting for this, or the argument, by some Republicans for not even being willing to have the conversation, is by them saying, well, this isn't even really a problem. I mean, this isn't something that people are looking for. Well, according to who? How many people want to conceive but can't because they just don't have the means? And the people that are voting for these people have no idea that the people they're voting for are the ones that are actually their biggest enemy when it comes to their life goals and their family goals. And so it really takes a certain amount of education. On Cindy's point, people saying, well, what is wrong? By saying, what is wrong with you? To say, well, America is not the greatest country. Well, that is a subjective term, and that could be defined multiple ways, right? There are different programs happening in other European countries that are really great for society that don't happen here. So yeah, that makes sense. But those people aren't educated on that. Those people are willfully ignorant to what's happening around them, and they just want to be told by the talking heads what to do. And unfortunately, those talking heads are fed by the same people, where their information comes from the same people who are lobbying to have these programs put in place or not put in place to manage costs and things like that. So I think that's how I feel about that. The people who are going to be affected, yes, are going to be the most poor, but oftentimes it's the members of their very own party that are putting them in power.
And also remember the intertwining of religious beliefs with legislative decisions, particularly in the matters of reproductive health, could actually be seen as a regression rather than a step forward in society. But one way that you, dear viewer, can step forward is watching more nonprofits. So click here.